She didn't run away for love, but for her father, a powerful, cold man who owned his daughter. On a rainy night in the Wild West, she ran not to survive, but to find herself. Have you ever had to leave a place you called home just to breathe free? If it were you, between family and freedom, which would you choose? In the lonely desert of fate, she meets a man who promises nothing, only silently extends a helping hand, a loveless marriage, but opens the path to healing. When a wounded heart meets a heart that has been lost, can they find true freedom together? If you have ever believed that love is not a chain, but a place where we can be ourselves, join me in the story of she became the cowboy's wife to escape her father. He became her freedom. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss emotional stories like this. The sound of a gun cracked through Cedar Valley just after midnight. The echo rolled across the hills like thunder chasing the moon. Inside the old Ellison ranch house, the smell of whiskey was thicker than the smoke from the hearth. Mara Ellison stood by the window, her hands trembling as she tied the last strap of her saddlebag. 40 years had taught her how to move quietly, how to disappear inside her own house. Tonight, that skill might save her life. Her father, Sheriff Abel Ellison, slept in the chair by the fire, a bottle balanced between his boots. The badge on his chest still caught the glow of the coals, but the man beneath it had long stopped living by its code. Since her mother died, whiskey had been his law, and Mara his prisoner. He'd told her that morning, in the same flat voice he used for hangings, that she would marry Wes Carraway, the richest cattleman in 3 counties, a man old enough to have fought beside her father, a man whose hands left bruises on every woman he ever called wife. Better a mean man with money than no man at all, her father had said. His words had landed like stones in her stomach. Now, the wedding dress, a rough muslin thing Carraway's cook had sewn, lay folded on the table, waiting for dawn. Mara looked at it once, then reached for her coat instead. Outside, the valley was black as ink. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and somewhere far off, a coyote cried. She slipped into the barn, her boots muffled by straw. Dusty, her mother's old mare, raised her head and snorted softly, as if she'd been expecting this moment all along. "Easy, girl," Mara whispered. "We're leaving." She saddled the horse by lantern light, her fingers shaking only when she tied the small canvas bundle behind the saddle. One change of clothes, a loaf of cornbread, and a folded deed wrapped in oilskin. It was the land her mother had bought in her own name, the only thing Abel Ellison had never managed to drink away. When she swung into the saddle, the barn door creaked. For a breath, she froze. Then she heard him stir inside the house, the scrape of boots, the muttered curse of a man half awake. Her father was up. Mara kicked Dusty's flank. The horse lunged forward into the dark. Behind her came the roar of a shotgun, pellets tearing through the night air. Wood splintered near the gate, and the echo rolled down the valley like a warning. She bent low over the mare's neck, heart hammering against the saddle horn. Wind stung her eyes, and tears she didn't feel streaked across her cheeks. All she could think was ride, just ride, by dawn. She had crossed the ridge above the valley. Cedar Creek shimmered below, a thin silver ribbon cutting through the sage. Her coat was soaked with sweat and dew. She stopped only long enough to let the horse drink and to breathe the first breath of freedom she'd had in 20 years. It didn't taste sweet yet. It tasted like fear. For 2 days she rode north, keeping to dry creek beds and the edges of cottonwood groves. She slept sitting up, the pistol her father had given her for her 16th birthday, lying across her lap. The food ran out on the second evening. Her throat burned, her lips cracked. Every hoofbeat sounded like pursuit. When the storm came, it didn't bring mercy. It brought sand grinding, choking wind that turned the sky red. Dusty stumbled, snorting, her sides heaving, Mara's vision blurred. She saw a shadow of a building a square, low shape against the storm, and pulled the reins. The door hung off its hinges. Inside was darkness and the smell of rain-soaked wood. A single chair, a broken stove, and the remains of someone's camp. She dragged the horse inside the ruins and collapsed beside her. That's when she heard it, the clink of spurs outside, steady, unhurried. A man's silhouette filled the doorway, hat brim low against the rain. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Ma'am, you aimed to shoot me with that pistol. You might want to cock the hammer first." She realized her hand had been on the gun the whole time. He stepped closer, slow enough not to spook her or the horse. His voice was low, rough from dust and years. "Name's Cole Brenner. I'm heading north with a herd. You look like you been heading away from something." Mara tried to stand, but her legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the floor. The smell of leather and rain filled her lungs. She fought to speak, but the world tilted and went black. When she woke, the storm had passed. A small fire burned in the stove, and the stranger sat across from her, hat off, stirring something in a tin pot. Outside, the wind had gone quiet. He nodded toward her. "You'll want to sip slow," he said. "Coffee's bitter, but it keeps you steady." She looked at him, his hands scarred. The left sleeve mended 3 times, the face weathered like the plains themselves. Not young, but solid. Not kind, exactly, but careful. "Why'd you help me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. He shrugged. Storm didn't seem like a fair fight. "Besides, I don't leave folks to the coyotes." She managed a tired smile. "Then I owe you. Don't make debts out here," he said quietly. "Just favors. And favors always come back around." For a while, they sat in silence, the fire snapping between them. Mara felt the tremor in her hands ease. The man didn't press her with questions. He only offered a second tin cup and looked out through the broken doorway at the dawn. Outside, the desert was washed clean, the horizon painted with streaks of rose and gold. Mara thought of her father, of the empty bottle that would be rolling across the floor by now, of the wedding dress folded on the table. Somewhere behind her, that life was dying. Ahead. She didn't know what waited, but at least it was hers to find. Cole poured the last of the coffee, his gaze still on the light breaking over the valley. "Sun's up," he said. "Best time to start moving. Storms leave tracks." Mara stood, swaying slightly, and adjusted the saddle on Dusty. Her body ached, but her voice was steady. "Then let's make sure they can't follow." He gave a single nod. "North. Then, there's open country ahead." As they rode out of the ruined inn, the sun climbed above the ridge, throwing long shadows across the sand. Mara didn't look back at Cedar Valley. She just tightened her hands on the reins and whispered to the wind, "Keep your ghosts. Father, I'm done carrying them." And for the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. When the sun lifted over the ridge, the storm had washed the world to the color of pale honey. Dust still hung low, but the air carried the scent of wet sage and juniper. Mara rode beside the man who'd saved her, both of them quiet as if afraid sound might call the past back. Cole Brenner kept his hat low against the morning light. His horse, a tall bay with a scar on its flank, moved steady beside Dusty. He rode like a man who'd spent half his life in the saddle and the other half remembering why. They reached a dried creek bed by noon. Cole dismounted first, scanned the horizon, and motioned for her to do the same. "Tracks'll fade by afternoon," he said, crouching to touch the soil. Storm helped. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, without curiosity or pity. That steadiness soothed her in a way words never could. Mara stretched her aching legs, drank from the canteen he handed her, and felt the first warmth in days spread through her chest. She didn't thank him aloud. Something in his silence told her he didn't need it. Gratitude, like grief, was better carried quiet. They rested under a cottonwood, the branches dripping from last night's rain. Cole fed the horses, tore a strip of jerky, and handed half to her. The gesture was simple, almost shy. "You from around here?" he asked at last. She shook her head. "Farther south, Cedar Valley." He didn't react, but she caught the flicker in his eyes. He'd heard of it. Everyone had. A place where the law wore a badge by day and drank itself blind by night. "Valley folks don't usually leave," he said. "I'm not most folks." He nodded once, then said nothing more. She liked that about him. He gave her space enough to breathe, something she hadn't had under her father's roof in years. By late afternoon, they rode again. The land stretched endless rolling grass, red earth, and a horizon that looked too wide for secrets. Mara's mind wandered back to the farmhouse, to the shot that had split the night. Was her father still alive? Would he chase her? Or would he drown his shame in another bottle? The thought chilled her more than the wind. Cole broke her silence. "You got family waiting somewhere?" "Not anymore." He studied her profile for a moment, but didn't pry. "Then you'll ride with me till you figure where to set your boots next. Safer that way. Why help me?" He flicked the reins. "Guess I've had enough ghosts on my conscience." Something in his tone, soft, almost broken, told her not to ask which ghosts. As dust settled, they found another shelter, a way station long abandoned by mail riders. The walls leaned inward, but it was dry. Cole started a fire, careful and slow. She watched his hands, the sure rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. When the flames caught, he set a pot of coffee on the stones. "Eat what's left," he said, pulling bread from his saddlebag. "Ain't much, but better than wind." Mara smiled faintly. "Wind's got fewer calories, but I'll take my chances." That earned the ghost of a chuckle from him low. Rough, fleeting. It was the first time she'd heard that sound in weeks, maybe months. It startled her how much she wanted to hear it again. After they ate, Cole unrolled his bedroll near the door. "You take the cot," he said. "Springs are bad, but they won't bite. I can manage on the floor." He shook his head. "Floor's colder than it looks. Don't argue." Something about the quiet authority in his voice disarmed her. It wasn't her father's command. Sharp and cruel it was concern, plain and human. She lay down on the narrow cot, wrapped her coat around her shoulders, and stared at the rafters. Outside, a coyote howled, long and lonesome. The sound drew an ache out of her chest. She hadn't known was there. Cole stirred the fire once, then sat against the wall, eyes half closed. "You sleep light," she murmured. "Old habit. Some things don't fade." "War?" He nodded. "War and other things." The silence between them grew comfortable, filled only by the hiss of wood and the breathing of horses outside. Mara turned toward him. "I don't mean to bring trouble your way. If they come looking, you don't owe me anything." Cole opened one eye, the firelight glinting off it. "Ma'am, where I come from, we don't hand folks over to the kind of men who shoot at their own blood. You ride with me? You're under my word." It was said so simply, she almost missed the weight behind it. Out here, a man's word was worth more than the law. Morning came slow and silver. The air was sharp, the world clean again. Cole saddled his horse while she fetched water from the stream. When she returned, he handed her a small bundle, a faded scarf, neatly folded. "Found it in your saddlebag last night," he said. "Looked like it mattered." She took it gently, smoothing the worn fabric between her fingers. "It was my mother's." He nodded, waiting, as if knowing she needed to speak. "She used to wear it when she rode. Said it kept the dust out and the bad dreams away." Mara smiled faintly. "Guess it didn't work too well for either of us." "Maybe it did," he said. "You're still riding, aren't you?" She looked up then, met his eyes, and for a heartbeat saw not just a stranger, but something steadier, a place her fear couldn't reach. They packed and mounted. As they turned north, she noticed he always kept her horse slightly ahead of his, like a guard quietly watching her back. He didn't make promises, didn't offer comfort in words, but every small action told her he meant to keep her safe. By midday, the sky opened wide, bright and endless. A hawk wheeled overhead, and the earth smelled of sun-warmed grass. For the first time since leaving Cedar Valley, Mara felt something close to peace. Cole glanced her way. "We'll reach Silver Bend by tomorrow. It's a good place to rest. Folks mind their business there." She hesitated. "And after?" He gave a small shrug. "After's your choice. Might be you'll want to head farther north. There's work. Quiet land. No one asking questions." Her heart tightened. "And you?" He adjusted his reins. "I keep moving. Always have." The words settled heavy in her chest. She didn't know why it mattered, but it did. As the sun lowered, painting the plains in gold, she turned once to look at him. The wind caught his hat brim, revealing lines carved deep by weather and sorrow. He looked every bit the drifter he claimed to be, yet there was nothing aimless in the way he rode. Every movement was deliberate, every silence full. That night they camped beside a shallow river, the water whispering over stones. Cole built another small fire and took out a harmonica. The tune was slow, old, maybe from before the war. Mara listened, eyes closed. The music was rough but tender, carrying something she couldn't name regret, maybe, or mercy. When he stopped, she said quietly, "You play like a man remembering someone." He didn't answer, only stared into the fire until the sparks faded. Then, softly, "Maybe I am." They didn't speak again. The stars above were endless, and the quiet between them grew wide enough to hold both their sorrows. Somewhere in that quiet, Mara realized she wasn't afraid anymore. The storm had passed, but the calm it left was his doing. By the time dawn touched the river, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't running alone anymore. The road to Silver Bend lay open and dry. The storm's fury had scrubbed the land clean, leaving the sky wide as forever. For the first time since she'd fled Cedar Valley, Mara felt the distance between fear and possibility stretch like the horizon ahead. Cole rode beside her, hat low, reins easy in his hands. Every few miles he glanced back along the trail, checking for riders. He never spoke of it, but she knew he was watching for her father's men. They reached the edge of a small settlement near sundown. A sagging sign read Silver Bend, population 312. A dog barked somewhere behind a barn. The air smelled of smoke and molasses. Cole slowed his horse. "Town's quiet this time of day," he said. "We'll water the animals, then move on before anyone gets too curious." Mara nodded, pulling her coat tighter. She felt every eye on her as they passed the general store. The old men on the porch stopped talking, their gazes sharp as razors. Women at the well paused mid-pump, whispers following her boots. Word traveled fast in country this small. Inside the livery, Cole spoke with the stableman, paid for feed, and came back with his jaw tight. "Someone recognized your horse. Said she's Sheriff Ellison's mare." Mara's stomach dropped. "Then they know who I am. They know who your father is," he corrected. "Not who you are now." Before she could answer, 2 deputies stepped into the alley. Dusty's reins slipped from her hand as one called out, "Evenin', Miss Ellison. Sheriff's been looking for you." Cole's hand went to his holster not fast. "Just ready." His voice stayed calm. "She's Mrs. Brenner, my wife." The deputies hesitated. "You got proof of that?" Cole smiled thinly. "We signed papers last week outside Laramie. Justice of the peace can confirm. Unless you're calling him a liar." The men shifted, uncertain. Nobody liked accusing a lawman of lying, even one they'd never met. Finally one muttered, "We'll check." "You do that," Cole said. "We'll be on our way come sunrise." When they were gone, Mara exhaled shakily. "Why'd you say that, about being your wife?" He met her eyes. "Because it's the only thing that'll stop them from taking you back till the truth catches up. Out here, a married woman's got rights, a runaway daughter don't." The logic cut sharp and clean. She stared at him. "You'd marry a stranger just to keep me safe? I'd marry a good soul to keep her free," he said simply. "Paper or no paper?" They left Silver Bend that night. The stars spilled across the sky like spilled salt. Neither spoke until the town lights faded behind them. "Finally," Mara said softly, "if we do this, it'll be real enough for the law, but not otherwise." Cole nodded. "You'll have your say in all things. I don't take what ain't offered." Something in her chest eased. "Then we'll call it a bargain." "Fair enough." The next morning they found an itinerant preacher traveling with a wagon of hymn books. He looked them over, suspicion melting into weariness. "If the Lord wants 2 souls to find peace, I reckon I'm not to stand in the way," he said. The ceremony took 5 minutes. The preacher read from a worn Bible. The wind carried away half his words. Cole slid a thin band of silver onto her finger, a simple ring he'd kept from an old saddlebag. When he said, "I will," his voice was steady, almost tender. Mara couldn't bring herself to repeat the same words. Instead, she whispered, "I will try." The preacher smiled as if that were good enough. He wrote their names in his book, ink bleeding through the page, and left them with a blessing and 2 cracked mugs of coffee. When the wagon disappeared down the trail, Mara and Cole stood in silence. The sun warmed their backs, and somewhere far off a hawk screamed. She turned the ring on her finger. "Feels strange. Paper promises usually do," he said. "But sometimes they keep the wolves away." They rode until afternoon heat shimmered above the ground, stopping near a creek. Cole let his horse drink and then spoke quietly. You can still change your mind." "Mara, we can burn that page and ride separate ways." She looked at him across the water, wind tugging at her hair. "And go we're back to the man who'd sell me." To the law that only listens to him. She shook her head. No, I'll take my chances with you. A long silence followed. Then he said, Guess that makes it official. That night, their small camp felt different. Not warmer, just settled, like the world had chosen a shape for them. Cole sat whittling a piece of pine, the firelight catching his face. Mara watched him, wondering what loss had carved the stillness inside him. Was there someone before me, she asked suddenly. He kept carving. There was. Once. What happened? She died while I was off fighting a war that wasn't worth her grief. I'm sorry. He nodded. So am I. She reached out, took the shavings from his lap, and tossed them into the fire. Then maybe this time, neither of us fights for nothing. His eyes lifted to hers. The silence stretched between them, soft and alive. When she turned away to unroll her blanket, he said quietly, You deserve peace. Mara, whether you find it with me or without me. Her throat tightened. Maybe I'll just borrow yours for a while. He smiled, small but real. Reckon I can spare some. They slept beneath the open sky. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of wild mint. For the first time since leaving Cedar Valley, Mara dreamed without fear only of long roads and a man whose silence spoke like prayer. At dawn, Cole was already saddling the horses. We've got a long trail north, he said. Still Silver Bend. He shook his head. Farther, a ranch where folks won't ask questions, till this blows over. She looked toward the horizon, the sun rising over the distant ridges. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was hers now. She climbed into the saddle and said softly, Then let's ride. Husband. The word felt strange, heavy and new, but not wrong. Cole tipped his hat and smiled, the kind of smile that belonged to men who'd lost too much and still chose to protect. As they rode north, the valley opened like a promise. Mara's hand brushed the ring again. It was cold, but steady, just like the man beside her. The trail north wound through miles of open prairie, a sea of grass that moved like slow water beneath the wind. The air carried the faint hum of insects and the scent of sun-baked sage. Mara rode a few paces behind Cole, her new husband in name, her companion in truth. The papers the preacher had signed still felt unreal to her, like a borrowed life she was trying on. Yet the further they rode, the less it mattered what words the world used. The air itself seemed to whisper that she belonged to no one's command anymore. Cole's movements were quiet and deliberate. He rose before dawn, brewed coffee in a dented tin pot, and spoke only when words were needed. He'd point out tracks in the dirt, weather signs in the clouds, safe streams where the water ran clean. She found herself listening to every fragment of his voice, learning the language of the land through him. One afternoon, he stopped at the edge of a small ravine. See that stand of cottonwoods, he said, pointing with his glove. We'll camp there, shade and water both. They dismounted, led the horses to drink, and built a small fire under the trees. Cole showed her how to twist brushwood for kindling, how to feed the flames without choking them. The domesticity of it, two people tending fire and meal, stirred something in her chest that she hadn't felt since her mother's kitchen. Never figured I'd learn to make coffee over a campfire, she said, pouring a measure of grounds. He grinned faintly. You'll learn worse things before we're through. Like what? Like patience. She laughed, a sound that startled them both. It came out rusty, but real, echoing across the empty land. Cole looked up, his eyes softening. Ain't heard laughter like that since before the war, he murmured. That evening, after supper, the light turned honey gold. Cole took out his pocket knife and carved a notch into the handle of his saddle. She asked him what it meant. "Every place I've made it through," he said. "When the saddle's full, I'll stop moving." "And what'll you do then?" He thought for a moment. "Maybe build a house where the wind don't rattle the windows." Mara smiled. "You think the wind listens to men?" "No," he said quietly, "but sometimes it listens to women." They fell silent, listening to the endless murmur of the plains. For a while, neither moved. The day's heat lingered, the smell of dust mingling with the faint sweetness of prairie flowers. In the following days, they grew used to each other's rhythms. She learned to read his silences, the difference between the ones that meant danger and the ones that meant peace. He learned that she could handle a rifle, mend a torn saddle strap, and calm a skittish horse better than most men. Once, when a storm threatened in the distance, he said, "We'll ride through it." She raised an eyebrow. "That a command, Mr. Brenner?" He smiled. "Just advice, Mrs. Brenner. You can ignore it if you like." They rode hard through the wind, rain stinging their faces. When the sky finally cleared, they were soaked to the bone and laughing like children. Mara hadn't laughed that way in years. She realized how light her heart felt, how the fear that once sat heavy in her chest was slowly loosening. They found shelter in an old way station, 4 walls, a roof that mostly held, and a stove still strong enough to burn. Cole hung their coats to dry while she wrung water from her hair. "You always travel like this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Been moving too long to remember otherwise. Don't you ever get tired of running?" He met her gaze. "Maybe I'm not running. Maybe I just ain't found what's worth stopping for." She looked at him, heart unsteady. "And if you did, then I'd stop." She didn't ask more. Some answers were better left in the quiet between them. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the cracked shutters. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. Cole had scavenged from their packs, turning the simplest food into a feast. She joined him at the table, hair still damp, cheeks flushed from sleep. "I didn't think cowboys cooked," she teased. "I don't," he said. "I survive. Cooking's just the fancy name for it." As they ate, he told her about the ranches north of the Yellowstone, how the land rolled like waves, how the grass grew so high it brushed a rider's knees. She listened, picturing the place, wondering if that might be where they'd end up. That afternoon, they met a wagon train headed south, families on the move, faces dusty, children wide-eyed. One woman offered Mara a biscuit, asked how long she and her husband had been married. Mara hesitated, glancing at Cole. He gave her a small nod. "Not long," she said, "but long enough to know he snores." The women laughed, and Mara laughed with them. For a few precious minutes, she felt ordinary, not hunted, not hiding just another traveler on a long road. When the wagons passed out of sight, Cole spoke softly. "You did good. At lying at livin'." They camped that night beside a narrow stream. The moon rose full and yellow, painting the grass in silver. Cole took off his hat, leaned back against his saddle, and looked up. "You ever think about what comes after all this?" Mara wrapped her shawl tighter. "After running, after surviving." She thought about it. "Maybe I'll find a place where no one knows my name. Plant something. Watch it grow." He nodded. "That's a fine plan. I used to think I'd die alone." He said, "Now I ain't so sure." The words slipped out like breath, unguarded. Mara turned toward him, saw the truth in his face, and felt her own walls shift. The wind moved softly through the grass, and for a moment it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Neither of them spoke again that night, but when she fell asleep, the sound of his breathing beside her was steadier than any lullaby she remembered. By morning, they were on the trail again. The plains rolled away behind them, endless and forgiving. Each mile carried them farther from the ghosts that had once ruled her life. And somewhere deep inside, Mara began to believe that freedom wasn't something you ran toward. It was something that grew, quietly, in the space between fear and trust. The air turned cooler as the season leaned toward early fall. Each evening came faster, bringing the faint scent of pine smoke and rain. Mara and Cole had traveled for weeks since leaving Silver Bend, crossing creeks, plains, and lonely ridges where only hawks marked the sky. The rhythm of the trail had become their life-morning fire, steady miles, shared silence. Yet that silence was changing. It wasn't the quiet of fear anymore, but something gentler, like two hearts breathing in time. They camped that night by a shallow stream bordered with cottonwoods. The leaves whispered in the dark, and the first stars trembled above them. Cole tethered the horses, then set about building the fire. He worked with that same careful precision she'd come to know, each motion deliberate, nothing wasted. Mara watched him, feeling a pull she couldn't quite name. When the flames caught, she took a tin pot, filled it from the stream, and made coffee. The small domestic ritual steadied her nerves. Cole sat across from her, hat off, rubbing the dust from his hands. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were the hiss of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. Finally, Mara broke the quiet. "You ever miss it? Town life." He looked up, one brow raised. "Can't miss what I never had. Rode for a ranch at 15, fought a war at 20, been moving ever since. What about family?" His gaze drifted toward the fire. "Had one once. She and the boy both died in the fever while I was away." The words landed soft but heavy. She felt them like a stone in her chest. "I'm sorry." He gave a small nod, eyes still on the flames. Wasn't anybody's fault, just the way of things. Mara wanted to reach across the fire and touch his hand, but she didn't. Instead, she said quietly, "It changes a person losing everything." He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw not the quiet protector, but the grief underneath. "Reckon it does. Makes you small for a while. Then you learn to live in the space that's left." A log cracked in the fire. The moment hung between them, fragile as glass. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, worn guitar. "You play?" she asked, surprised. He gave a half smile. "Badly, but it keeps the coyotes honest." He strummed a few slow chords, the melody rough but tender. It was an old frontier tune, one she half remembered her mother humming when the evenings grew long. The sound floated out over the plain, carried by wind and memory. Mara felt something shift inside her, a release she hadn't expected. Without thinking, she began to hum along quiet at first, then stronger, her voice finding its place in the night air. Cole glanced up, surprised, then smiled. "Didn't figure you for a singer." "I didn't figure you for a musician," she said softly. He chuckled. "Guess we're both learning things." They played another song, slower this time. The fire burned low, painting the world in shades of amber and shadow. Mara's voice trembled on the edges of the tune, and when it broke, Cole filled the silence with the gentle hum of the strings. When the last note faded, She whispered, "That was my mother's song." He nodded. Sounded like something worth remembering. She looked at him across the firelight. I used to think remembering hurt too much, but maybe forgetting hurts worse. That's wisdom most folks take too long to learn. The night deepened. The wind brushed her hair, the world gone still except for the fire's quiet sigh. She watched Cole's face in the flickering light, the scar along his jaw, the calm lines around his eyes. He was a man who carried sorrow like a second skin, yet he'd found a way to live inside it without bitterness. Mara found herself speaking before she could stop. You ever think about starting over? Somewhere no one knows your name. He looked at her for a long time, then said, "Every time the sun sets, then why don't you? Maybe I never had a reason to." She felt heat rise to her cheeks, and not from the fire. Her hands tightened on the tin cup, and now he studied her a moment, then said quietly, "Now I'm thinking, maybe I do." The words caught her breath. The world seemed to shrink to the circle of firelight, the space between them alive with unspoken things. She wanted to look away but couldn't. A gust of wind lifted the sparks, carrying them into the dark. Cole set the guitar aside, leaned forward, and poked the fire with a stick. "Get some rest," he said finally. "We've got a hard ride tomorrow." She nodded, lying back on her blanket, the stars wheeling above her. But sleep didn't come easy. The melody of his song lingered, wrapping around her like warmth she'd almost forgotten. Sometime near midnight, she woke to the sound of rain tapping softly on the leaves. The fire had burned low, and Cole was still awake, sitting against a tree, his hat pulled low. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she whispered. "Not when it rains," he said. "Used to mean the roof was leaking. Old habits stay." She smiled in the dark. "You'll wear yourself thin, carrying the world that way." He turned his head slightly, his voice low. "You worry too much." "Maybe," she said, "but someone ought to." The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It felt like a shared breath, an understanding beyond words. Before she drifted off again, she heard him murmur something almost too soft to catch. "You sing better than the coyotes, Mrs. Brenner." She smiled into the darkness, the corners of her mouth trembling. It was the first time he'd used her new name like it was real. By dawn, the rain had passed, leaving the world washed clean. The sky blushed pink above the ridges, and mist hung over the stream. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of horses nickering softly. Cole stood by the water, his silhouette outlined in light. For a moment, she simply watched him, the way his shoulders caught the sunrise, the steadiness in his stance. Something inside her whispered that this quiet morning, this man was the closest she'd ever been to peace. She rose, brushed the dew from her coat, and joined him by the stream. He handed her a cup without speaking. Their hands touched briefly, and she felt the warmth travel all the way to her heart. Neither of them said the word love. It was too soon, too fragile, but it was there, unspoken in the silence, carried in the music that still lingered between them. By the time they returned to Silver Bend, autumn had brushed gold across the cottonwoods. The town sat low in the valley, quiet but watchful. Smoke curled from chimneys, wagons rattled down the single dirt street, and the air carried the smell of horses and sweet grain. Mara felt the old unease stir in her stomach, a reminder that peace was still a borrowed thing. Cole noticed the way her hands tightened on the reins. "Just a night," he said softly. "We get supplies, rest the horses, and ride north again." She nodded. though her pulse drummed against her collarbone. The last time she'd been in a town. 2 deputies had nearly dragged her back to the life she'd escaped. The memory made every doorway feel like a threat. They stopped at the general store, where shelves sagged under flour, nails, and bolts of fabric faded by the sun. The owner, a plump woman with a shrewd smile, greeted Cole warmly. "Well, if it ain't Brenner, heard you been playing the hero again." Cole smiled a little. "Depends who's telling the story." The woman's eyes slid to Mara. "And this must be your missus. Folks have been talking about you two. Quite the tale. You ask me." Mara tried to return the smile, but her throat tightened. "What tale?" "Oh, you know how small towns are," the woman said, weighing a sack of flour. "Word is Sheriff Ellison's girl ran off and married a drifter. Man's been raising Cain down south, saying his daughter was taken against her will." Mara's blood turned to ice. Cole's jaw tensed, but he kept his voice calm. "Rumors get louder when folks got nothing better to do." The woman shrugged. "Maybe so, but if I were you, I'd keep riding. Ellison's name still carries weight around here. Outside, the sunlight felt harsh, the noise of the street too sharp." Mara turned to Cole, voice low. "He's still looking for me?" He nodded once. "Let him look. We'll keep moving." They spent the night at the edge of town in a small boarding house run by an older couple, the Donovans, who treated them kindly enough. Mrs. Donovan served stew thick with potatoes, while her husband spoke about the harvest, the new railroad, and the weather turning early this year. Ordinary talk, the kind that should have soothed Mara, yet underneath the warmth of supper, she sensed something else, curiosity, a quiet watching. After the meal, she and Cole sat on the porch. The wind smelled of rain, and the moon hung low behind the hills. Mara wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders. "They're all whispering," she said. "Everywhere we go. Someone knows something. That's how the West works." Cole replied. "Big sky. Small talk." She gave a humorless smile. "You think I'm safe here. I think safe's a word that don't last long. But I'll keep you breathing." The way he said it made her chest ache. It wasn't a promise of forever, only a vow for the moment, and somehow that meant more. As the night deepened, thunder rolled faintly across the plains. Cole stood, scanning the dark horizon. Storms moving in from the west. We'll leave come sunrise. Mara hesitated. "Do you ever get tired of running from ghosts?" He met her gaze. "I don't run from them. I just make sure they can't catch the people I care about." The softness in his tone disarmed her. She wanted to tell him how much that meant, how much he meant, but the words stayed lodged behind fear. Rain began before dawn, soft at first, then hard enough to drum against the roof. They saddled the horses under gray skies, the ground turning slick beneath their boots. Mrs. Donovan came out with a parcel of food. "Roads muddy, but clear north past the bridge. Watch for high water." "Much obliged," Cole said. As they mounted up, a rider appeared at the far end of the street. He wore a slick black coat and carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. Mara's heart stumbled, even through the mist. She recognized the stance, the squared shoulders, the arrogance. Wes Carroway. He hadn't seen her yet, but he would. "Cole," she whispered. He followed her gaze, his hand drifting toward his gun. "We ride." They turned down a side road, keeping low. The rain blurred their tracks, but Mara could feel Wes's eyes searching the town. He was close, too close. They crossed the bridge at a gallop, water splashing high against the horses' legs. Cole didn't slow until the valley opened behind them and the storm swallowed Silver Bend whole. When they finally stopped under a rocky ledge, both were soaked through. Mara slid off Dusty, trembling. He was there. Cole. Wes. He's found us. Cole's face was grim. Then we keep ahead of him. He's got men, maybe 5 or 6, but he ain't half the tracker he thinks he is. He won't stop, she said. He'll come until my father drags me back in chains. Cole reached out, gripping her shoulder gently. Listen to me, Mara. You're not going back. Not now. Not ever. You're a free woman, and I'll stand between you and every man who says otherwise. Her eyes burned. Why, you don't even know me. He hesitated. Maybe I don't. But I know what it means to lose your life piece by piece till you ain't yourself no more. I ain't letting that happen to you. The rain softened, turning to mist. For a moment, the world seemed small, just the two of them under a ledge, breath steaming in the cold. Mara swallowed hard. Then promise me one thing. If they come, you won't die for me. Promise you'll live. He looked at her a long time, then said quietly, Don't ask a man to make promises he can't keep. The words cut deep, but she understood. Some oaths were too heavy to speak. That night they camped near the foothills. The rain stopped, leaving the air thick with silence. Cole sat cleaning his revolver, the firelight glinting off the barrel. Mara watched him, memorizing the lines of his face, the way the light softened the hardness there. Tomorrow, he said, we head for the pass. Once we're over it, there's country even Wes won't cross. Cold, rough, but free. She nodded, though her stomach twisted with fear. Freedom, she was learning, was never given. It was fought for, mile by mile. Later, as she drifted toward sleep, Cole's voice reached her through the dark. You're braver than you think. Mara. She wanted to answer, but exhaustion claimed her first. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the faint echo of hoofbeats far behind them, distant, but closing. The wind off the mountains carried a strange chill that morning. It smelled of snow, though winter was still a month away. Mara pulled her coat close, her fingers numb despite the gloves. Cole rode ahead, his shoulders hunched against the wind, eyes on the ridge that curved west toward the high country. Behind them, the world stretched wide and empty, no towns, no tracks, no sign of pursuit. Yet Mara couldn't shake the feeling that danger still rode the horizon. By midday, the clouds thickened to slate. Cole reined in beside a rocky outcrop. We'll stop here, he said. Storm's coming faster than I thought. They found shelter in a shallow cave, dry and deep enough for the horses. Cole built a small fire while Mara unpacked the blankets. The smell of wet earth and pine filled the air, grounding her even as thunder rumbled over the valley. When lightning flashed, she flinched. He looked over. You all right? She nodded quickly. Just hate storms. He poured her coffee from the pot balanced on the fire's edge. Ain't the storm you hate. It's what it reminds you of. She met his eyes. And what's that being trapped? His words struck true, and she didn't deny them. She sipped the bitter coffee, letting its warmth steady her hands. The wind howled outside, and rain began to pour, hard and cold. After a while, Cole leaned back against the stone wall. Since we're waiting out the weather, maybe it's time we stop running quiet. She frowned. What do you mean? He poked at the fire with a stick. I figure you've got more ghosts than you let on, and I've got my share too. Might be we sleep easier if we let 'em speak for a while." Mara hesitated, the air between them heavy. Then she nodded. "All right." She told him about her mother's death, how her father had changed overnight, how the house had grown silent, except for the sound of bottles clinking. She spoke of the day she'd turned 20 and realized he meant to trade her life for his debts. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. When she finished, the fire had burned down to red coals. Cole said nothing for a long time. Then he spoke, voice low. "You did what you had to do. Ain't shame in running from a man who stopped being a father." Mara managed a faint smile. "And you, what ghosts follow you?" He looked into the fire as if the answers lay there. "War," he said finally. "I was a captain for the Union. Thought I was doing right. But I gave an order one night, a bad one. Sent a squad through a valley I hadn't scouted. They didn't come back." She listened, her chest tightening. "How many? 12. All boys, really. The youngest was 17. He used to hum while he cleaned his rifle. I still hear it sometimes when the wind gets low." Mara reached across the space between them and touched his arm. "You couldn't have known." His voice roughened. "That's the curse of it. I did know. I just didn't want to wait till morning." The confession hung between them like smoke. Rain hammered outside, echoing the ache in their words. "Finally," she said softly, "you've carried that weight too long. So have you." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. It wasn't empty. It was honest. The fire's glow flickered across their faces, and something fragile but sure passed between them, an understanding deeper than pity. When the thunder faded, Mara unrolled the blankets. "We should rest." Cole nodded. He lay on one side of the fire. She lay on the other. The space between them felt smaller than it looked. Sometime past midnight, a sound woke her, not thunder this time, but the echo of hoofbeats. Faint, distant, but real. She sat up sharply. Cole! He was already awake, hand on his revolver. He moved to the mouth of the cave and peered out. Lightning flashed, revealing 2 riders moving along the ridge. "Scouts," he said. "Caraway's men." Her heart lurched. "What do we do?" "We wait till they pass. Storm'll hide our tracks." They crouched in the shadows, the wind howling through the rocks. The riders stopped once, scanning the valley below, then moved on. When the last echo faded, Cole exhaled. "Close," he murmured. "Too close." Mara leaned against the wall, trembling. They won't stop. Will they? No. But neither will we. The storm raged until dawn, then died slowly, leaving the world washed in silver light. Steam rose from the wet grass as the sun broke through. Cole saddled the horses, his movements quiet but efficient. Before they rode out, Mara turned to him. "Thank you. For last night. For listening." He gave her a long look. "You didn't need saving, Mara. You just needed someone to remind you you were already free." They rode north again. The air was cold and clean, the sky impossibly wide. Mara felt lighter, though she knew danger still followed. For the first time, she didn't feel hunted, only alive. That evening they camped on a ridge overlooking miles of open land. Cole built another small fire, his hand steady despite the wind. He took out the guitar again, strumming softly. Mara listened, her heart settling into the rhythm. "That song," she said, recognizing the melody. "You played it the night we met." He nodded. Figured it might sound better with company. "It does." He looked up, eyes meeting hers across the glow. "You know, I used to think talking was how folks healed. Now I think it's just sitting quiet beside someone who understands." She smiled, the firelight catching her hair. "Then we're both getting better." The night wrapped around them, gentle and vast. The air smelled of pine and new beginnings. Somewhere below, an owl called to its mate, and the sound lingered like a promise. Cole set the guitar aside. "Tomorrow we'll reach the foothills. After that, the pass. Hard ride, but worth it. Worth it for what? For the peace on the other side." Mara watched the fire burn lower, her thoughts caught between fear and hope. "And when we find it," he smiled faintly, "then maybe we'll build that house where the wind don't rattle the windows." She laughed softly. "You still believe the wind listens to women?" He leaned back, looking at the stars. "I do tonight." The words settled over her like a blessing. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire and his quiet presence sink deep. For the first time in her memory, she wasn't defined by what she'd fled, but by the road she was choosing to take. And though the storm had passed, she knew both of them were still learning how to stand in the calm without fear. The trail narrowed as they climbed toward the high pass. The air grew thin, sharp enough to sting their lungs. Snow still clung to the shadows of the peaks, and the sound of the wind whistling through the ravines felt almost like voices calling from far away. By noon, Cole called for a stop near a cluster of pines that bent east under the weight of years of storms. He dismounted, scanning the valley below with his spyglass. "We've got company," he said. Mara's pulse jumped. How close half a day behind? Maybe less. She followed his gaze and saw faint movement along the lower trail, a flicker of motion, the glint of metal. Wes. Cole lowered the glass. "Ain't just him. Looks like 6 riders. Maybe 7. Her hands trembled against the reins. "We can't outrun them forever." "I know." He looked toward the ridge, where a narrow canyon split the mountainside. "But we can make a stand if we have to." Mara shook her head. "You said no more running, but I won't let you fight them for me." He met her eyes. "I ain't fighting for you, Mara. I'm fighting with you. There's a difference." They rode until the sun began to drop behind the peaks, then turned into a shallow ravine that offered some shelter from the wind. Cole tethered the horses, set out the rifles, and began gathering dry brush. Mara watched him, heart twisting at his quiet efficiency. She joined him in silence, helping build a small barricade from fallen branches. Every motion felt both surreal and inevitable. When the fire was lit, he handed her a pistol. "You know how to use it." "My father taught me," she said bitterly. "He thought fear made a woman obedient. He was wrong." Cole nodded, respect glinting in his eyes. "Then you'll do fine." The night fell heavy and cold. They ate jerky and beans in silence, listening to the wind scrape across the rocks. Cole checked his revolver one last time, then sat beside her, elbows on his knees. "You scared?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she admitted, "but not of dying." He looked at her, brow furrowing. Then of what of living just long enough to lose everything again? He nodded slowly. "That's the kind of fear you can't shoot your way out of." The sound of hoofbeats came before dawn. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the canyon. Mara's blood went cold. Cole motioned for her to stay low behind the rocks. He moved forward, crouching near the fire pit, his revolver steady in his hand. A voice rang out, familiar and slick. "Brenner, you got something belongs to me." Mara flinched. Wes Carraway's drawl carried through the cold air like oil. Cole called back, calm but firm. "Only thing I've got is a woman who don't belong to anyone." Laughter drifted back. That's so you think you can keep her. You think her daddy's going to let some broken soldier steal his property. Mara rose from behind the rocks, rage burning through the fear. I'm not property, she shouted. And he's not my father anymore. A pause. Then Wes's voice hardened. You just made your choice. Girl. Gunfire cracked across the ridge. Cole ducked, returning fire with quick precision. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. Mara crouched beside him, heart pounding. Cole. He reloaded smoothly. Stay low. The fight lasted minutes that felt like hours. Bullets sparked against stone, shattering shards of granite. The horses screamed and bolted down the ravine. Smoke and dust choked the air. When the gunfire stopped, the silence was deafening. Then came the slow, deliberate sound of boots crunching gravel. Wes Carroway stepped into view, pistol in hand, his black coat whipping in the wind. His face was pale with fury. Step aside. Brenner, he said, this ain't your quarrel. Cole straightened slowly. Gun raised. You made it mine when you came after her. Wes sneered. You think she loves you? You think she'll still look at you the same once she sees what you are? You're just another killer wearing a white hat. Cole's voice stayed steady. Maybe, but at least I know the kind of man I am. Before Wes could reply, a single gunshot cracked. He staggered back, eyes wide, clutching his chest. Mara stood behind Cole, her arm trembling, smoke curling from her pistol. Wes sank to his knees, shock etched across his face. You wouldn't. But she had. He fell forward into the dust, the echo swallowed by the mountains. The world went still. Only the wind remained. Cole turned to her slowly. You all right? She nodded, though her body shook uncontrollably. I had to, she whispered. I couldn't let him. I know. He stepped closer, gently taking the pistol from her hand. You did what you had to do. Tears spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the dust and rain. I didn't want to kill anyone again. Then don't call it killin', he said softly. Call it survivin'. She looked up at him, searching for something steady. What she found was the same quiet strength that had carried her across every mile since the night she fled home. Cole knelt beside her, brushing the hair from her face. It's over. Mara! But she shook her head. No, it's just beginning. He didn't argue. He helped her stand. And together they walked down the ridge to where the horses waited. The dawn was breaking now, the light thin and pale over the peaks. They buried Wes beneath a cairn of stones, marking the grave with a single pine branch. Cole said nothing, but when Mara whispered a few words more for herself than for the dead, he took off his hat and bowed his head. When it was done, they rode north again. The sun climbed higher, burning the mist away. Mara's hand steadied on the reins, the weight in her chest lighter than it had been in years. Cole looked over at her. You did what no one else could. You faced him. She met his gaze, her voice quiet but sure. I didn't face him alone. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and thawing earth. Ahead, the mountains opened into a vast plain, green and endless. Cole pointed toward it. Wyoming Territory. That's the line. Mara smiled faintly. It looks like freedom. He nodded. That's 'cause it is. They rode on in silence, the ridge behind them fading into memory. The past, for once, did not follow. The morning after the gunfire, the world seemed impossibly still. The wind that had howled through the canyon now moved gentle, brushing through the pine branches like a sigh. The smell of smoke lingered faintly on Mara's clothes, but the heaviness in her chest had lifted. For the first time since she could remember, her life wasn't dictated by fear. Cole led the horses to water while Mara sat on a fallen log, staring at the ridge where they had buried Wes. The sun was climbing higher, melting the thin crust of frost on the grass. Each drop that fell glimmered like tiny pieces of glass. She thought of how fragile everything was and how beautiful it could still be after breaking. Cole came back with 2 cups of coffee, handed one to her, and sat beside her without speaking. He had a way of giving her space without leaving her alone. She took a sip. "You think my father knows he'll know soon enough," Cole said. "Word travels fast out here. What will he do?" He stared toward the horizon. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. A man like that don't take kindly to losing. Mara exhaled slowly. "Then we keep riding." He nodded. "North's still our best chance. Once we cross the Bighorn, there's land nobody claims. We could build something there." The word build felt foreign to her ears. For years, all she'd known was running, hiding, surviving. "You really think we could?" Cole looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ain't much in this world you can count on, Mara. But I reckon if we've come this far, we can build anything we damn well please." She smiled faintly, warmth creeping back into her bones. "Then let's find that place." They broke camp by noon. The trail turned soft and green again, the earth rich with new growth. Birds followed their path, darting between the trees. Mara found herself humming under her breath, the same tune they'd sung beside the fire weeks before. Cole glanced over his shoulder. "That song's gonna stick with me longer than any scar." She grinned. "Then it's done its job." By late afternoon, they reached a wide valley dotted with wildflowers. A stream cut through its center, winding lazily toward the horizon. Beyond it, a cluster of hills rose against the fading sky. Cole slowed his horse. "This could be it," he said quietly. Mara looked around. "It's beautiful." He dismounted, walking a few steps toward the stream. Water, grass, shelter from the wind. Everything a body needs. She joined him, kneeling to touch the cool surface of the water. "It feels alive." "It is," he said, "and so are we." That night, they built a small fire beside the stream. The air smelled of sage and wet earth. Cole took off his hat, setting it beside him, and stared at the flames. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think the world had already ended. After the war, after the fever, I didn't see much left worth staying for." Mara looked at him, her heart tightening. And now he smiled faintly. "Now I think maybe the world don't end. It just changes shape until you find your place in it again." She said nothing, but her hand found his in the firelight. He didn't pull away. Later, as the stars bloomed above them, Mara lay on her blanket, watching the constellations drift. The night air was cold, but she didn't feel it. Cole lay beside her, his breathing slow and even. She whispered into the dark, "You think people like us ever really find peace?" His voice came low, almost a rumble. "Maybe peace ain't something you find. Maybe it's something you make, little by little." She thought about that long after his breathing deepened into sleep. The truth of it settled deep in her bones. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt almost sacred. They built a rough shelter from logs and canvas, cooked over the fire, and worked until their hands were sore. Mara mended blankets while Cole repaired tack and rigged a pen for the horses. In the evenings, they watched the sun dip behind the hills, painting everything in gold. Once, she caught him watching her as she brushed Dusty. What she asked, smiling? He shrugged. "Just trying to remember the last time I saw someone look at a place like it was home." She met his eyes. "Maybe that's what this is." He nodded, and they fell into a comfortable silence. A week later, Cole rode to a nearby settlement for supplies. Mara stayed behind, tending to the fire and washing clothes by the stream. The solitude didn't frighten her anymore. It soothed her. She found herself talking to Dusty as she worked, laughing softly at her own foolishness. When Cole returned that evening, she noticed the change in his expression. He carried 2 sacks of grain, but his shoulders were tense. "What is it?" she asked. "Ran into a man at the post. Said there's talk south of the river. Sheriff Ellison's been sending letters. Offers gold for word of you." Mara's stomach turned. So it isn't over. He set the sacks down. It might never be. Not in the way you want. But out here, he's got no reach. He'll have to let go or die trying. She nodded, forcing herself to breathe. "I just want to live. Cole, not hide, not fight. Just live." He looked at her, and something in his gaze softened. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll live. The rest'll sort itself out." That night, as they sat by the fire, he took the small silver locket she always wore and opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of her mother. "You look like her," he said. "I hope so," Mara replied. "She was the strongest person I ever knew." He closed the locket gently and handed it back. "You might have passed her by now." She blinked back tears, but they were different now, quiet, not bitter, the kind that came when something inside you finally healed. The wind rustled the grass, whispering through the valley. Mara leaned against Cole's shoulder, eyes half closed. "This place feels like it was waiting for us." He smiled. Maybe it was. As the fire burned low, she thought about the journey, the fear, the storms, the blood. Every mile had cost them something, but it had also given them this, a place where the past no longer ruled the present. And as the stars wheeled slowly overhead, she understood that freedom wasn't a gift Cole had given her. It was something she'd claimed for herself, and he had simply walked beside her while she found it. Autumn deepened into the high country. The mornings came crisp, each breath a cloud in the air, and the fields turned gold under the thin sunlight. Mara woke each day to the quiet rhythm of the new life they'd built, a life made of small, steady things. The sound of the creek, the smell of coffee, the familiar creak of the cabin's timber frame as the wind brushed against it. Cole had found a peace in work, spending long hours repairing fences and tending to the horses. Mara kept the home warm, her hands busy mending, baking, planting what late seeds she could coax from the soil. It wasn't grand or easy, but it was theirs. One morning, as she was gathering kindling, she saw a figure approaching on horseback, a solitary rider moving slow up the ridge. Her heart quickened. She set down the bundle of sticks and called out, "Cole." He appeared from behind the barn, rifle in hand, eyes narrowing. "Stay back." The rider lifted a hand in greeting. "I come in peace," he shouted. When he drew closer, Mara saw the man was older, his coat dusty from travel, his hat frayed at the brim. He looked like someone who'd been on the trail too long. Cole stepped forward. "What's your business?" "Name's Thompson," the man said. "I carry letters. Found one addressed to a Mrs. Mara Brenner. Thought I'd best deliver it myself, Sheriff. Down in Silver Bend was mighty insistent." Mara's blood ran cold. Cole's hand tightened on the rifle. "Let's see it," he said. Thompson reached into his coat and handed over a small, weathered envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Abel Ellison's. Her father's. "Thank you," Mara said quietly, forcing her voice to stay calm. "You've come a long way." The man tipped his hat. Longer than I planned, ma'am. Storms near Cheyenne near took my horse's leg. Best of luck to you both." When he rode off, silence settled thick over the cabin. Cole glanced at her. "You don't have to read it?" "I do," she said. She sat on the porch steps, the paper trembling in her hands. The seal had already cracked. Her father must have written it weeks ago. Slowly, she unfolded the letter. Immediately. "If this reaches you, then the rumors are true. You're alive. I've spent months denying it, telling myself you'd been taken or worse. But I reckon I always knew you left of your own will. You've every reason to hate me. I gave you nothing but a name and a cage to live in. After your mother died, I thought control was the only way to keep what little I had left. I see now it was just another kind of loss. Wes Carraway came to me before he died. He said you pulled the trigger yourself. I should damn you for that, but I can't. Maybe he earned it. Maybe I did too. If you found peace, don't write back. Just know that I'm done looking. The house is quiet now. The bottle's gone, and so am I soon enough. Your father, Obel Ellison." When she finished reading, the paper slipped from her fingers. She stared out at the horizon, unable to move. Cole picked up the letter, scanned it once, and then folded it carefully. "He's let you go," he said softly. Mara's voice came small. "It doesn't feel like forgiveness." "Maybe it ain't," Cole said. "Maybe it's the best he knew how to give." She nodded slowly, tears stinging her eyes. "I used to dream he'd come for me, to drag me home. Now I don't know what to do with the quiet." He sat beside her on the step, resting his hand lightly on her shoulder. "You fill it, one day at a time." They sat like that for a long while, watching the sunlight dance on the creek. The letter lay folded between them, heavy with things that couldn't be undone, but no longer needed to be carried. That evening, as the fire burned low, Mara took the letter outside. She held it over the flames, watching the paper curl and blacken, the words turning to ash. Cole watched her through the window, saying nothing. When she came back in, her face was calm, her voice steady. "It's done." He nodded once. "You sure?" She met his eyes. "For the first time in my life, yes." In the days that followed, something inside her began to change. The nightmares came less often. The heaviness that had followed her since childhood began to fade. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw the frightened daughter of a sheriff or the fugitive bride of a cruel man. She saw herself. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of fence, Cole said quietly, "You ever think about what comes next?" She smiled faintly. "Always. Maybe we'll plant more next spring. Maybe I'll teach the children in town to read. I used to be good with words." He chuckled. "Reckon you still are." "And you?" she asked. He leaned against the post, eyes scanning the hills. "Might build that house I keep talking about. Something with windows that don't rattle." She laughed softly. "And a porch where you can watch the world go by." "Exactly that," he said, grinning. The next morning, she found him sketching on a piece of scrap paper, simple lines marking out walls and door frames. She watched him, realizing that he was no longer a man haunted by the past, but one building toward the future. That night, as they sat together beneath the stars, she said quietly, "Cole, I don't think I could have survived all this if not for you." He shook his head. "You're wrong. You'd have found your way out one way or another. I just rode beside you till you remembered how." She smiled, the corners of her eyes glistening. "Then don't stop riding now." He looked at her for a long time. the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "I ain't got any plans to." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and pine. It rustled the trees, soft and low, almost like a voice whispering its blessing. Mara closed her eyes and let it wash over her. The ghosts were gone now, not buried, not forgotten, but transformed into something gentler. They no longer haunted her. They watched from a distance, silent witnesses to her becoming. And as she leaned into Cole's shoulder, listening to the fire crackle, she realized she had finally found what she'd been chasing all along. Not escape, not even love, but peace. The first snow came early that year. It fell softly one evening while Mara was baking bread, dusting the window glass like flour. By morning, the hills were white and still. Cole stood by the doorway, coat buttoned, watching the flakes drift through the pale air. "Looks like winter's settling in," he said. Mara smiled faintly as she set a loaf to cool. "Good. Maybe it's time the world slowed down." They had been in the valley nearly 2 months now, long enough for the land to start feeling like home. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke. The shelves were lined with jars of dried beans and herbs. Every day followed a simple rhythm, mornings filled with chores, afternoons with quiet work, evenings with conversation and the low crackle of the fire. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was a life they'd built with their own hands, and that made all the difference. That morning, Mara went out to feed Dusty. The mare lifted her head, muzzle dusted white with snow, and nickered softly. "You like this, don't you?" Mara murmured, stroking her neck. The cold bit her fingers, but she didn't mind. The chill felt clean, like renewal. Cole came up behind her with an armful of wood. "You're gonna freeze out here?" She laughed. "Says the man who works half the day without gloves." He grinned. "Fair point." They walked back toward the cabin together, snow crunching under their boots. When they reached the porch, Mara paused, looking out at the wide sweep of white land. "Do you ever miss the noise of towns?" "The people?" Cole shook his head. "People talk too loud when they ain't listening. Out here, you can hear yourself think." She nodded. "I think that's what scared me most at first, hearing my own thoughts." He gave her a sidelong glance. "And now, I think they were just waiting for me to be still enough to listen." That evening, they sat beside the fire, the storm outside building in strength. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters. Cole tightened the latch. "Won't last long," he said. "These mountain storms burn quick." Mara stirred the stew, the smell of meat and onions filling the room. "You always say that, and then it snows for 3 days." He chuckled. "That's optimism, not prediction." After supper, she took down the guitar from the wall. "Play something," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure you always say I play like a man strangling a cat? That was before you learned to keep rhythm," she teased. He laughed and took the instrument. His fingers, though calloused, moved with surprising grace. The song was slow and mournful, a tune that spoke of faraway plains and the weight of memory. Mara listened, eyes half closed, her heart steadying with each note. When the music faded, she said quietly, "You know, I think this is the first winter I've ever looked forward to." He smiled. "Guess that means we're doing something right." Outside, the snow kept falling, thick and heavy now. By morning, the world had changed again. The fence posts were buried. The path to the creek vanished under white drifts. Cole shoveled a narrow trail to the barn while Mara swept the porch clear. When he came back in, his beard was frosted. "Can't hardly see the sky. It's all one color." She poured him coffee. Then stay in. The world can wait. He took the cup and looked at her with quiet affection. You're starting to sound like a woman who belongs here. Mara smiled. Maybe I finally do. Days passed like that, slow, peaceful, marked by small, ordinary moments that somehow felt extraordinary. Sometimes she'd find Cole sitting by the window, carving small wooden figures of horses or birds. Sometimes she'd hum while she worked, her voice low and warm, and he'd look up with a smile that said more than words ever could. Yet beneath the peace, there was still an ache, a memory that returned when the nights grew too long. One evening, as the fire burned low, Mara said softly, "Do you ever think about them? The ones you lost," Cole nodded. "Every day. But I don't see their faces angry anymore. Just young. I dream of my mother sometimes," Mara said. "She's always standing by the window, watching the snow fall, never turns around. What do you think she's looking at?" "Maybe me," Mara whispered. "Maybe this." Cole reached over and took her hand. "Then I'd say she's proud." The quiet stretched between them, not empty but full of something tender. The firelight flickered, painting their shadows on the wall like a promise. Later that night, the storm broke. The moon came out, full and bright over the snow. Mara woke and stepped outside, wrapped in her shawl. The air was still, the stars sharp as glass. Behind her, she heard the cabin door creak. "You'll catch cold," Cole said, voice rough from sleep. She turned, smiling. "I wanted to see it. The world looks different after a storm." He came beside her, his arm brushing hers. Maybe that's the point of storms. They stood in silence, watching the snow sparkle under the moonlight. The land stretched out before them, endless and untouched. For the first time in her life, Mara didn't see it as something to flee across, but as something to grow roots in. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You think the spring will be kind?" He smiled, his breath warm against the cold. "Reckon we've earned it." Inside, the fire still burned, steady and strong. The world outside was frozen, but in the small cabin on the ridge, there was warmth enough to last the winter. Mara closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet. Every part of her life, the pain, the fear, the loss had led her here. And for once, she wasn't running from it. She was standing in it, alive and unafraid. In the stillness, she finally understood something she hadn't before. Freedom wasn't loud. It didn't shout or demand. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it came wrapped in silence and snow. By March, the snow began to melt. Streams carved their way down from the high ridges, and the sound of running water returned to the valley. The days grew longer, brighter, softer. Mara stood at the doorway one morning, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, and thought she could smell the earth breathing again. Cole was already outside, repairing the corral fence. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, his hat pushed back on his head. Every motion was patient, deliberate, the kind of work a man did not because he had to, but because it meant something. Mara watched him for a while before stepping down from the porch. "You missed a post," she teased. He turned, smiling. "You always see the things I don't. That's because I'm standing still long enough to notice." He nodded toward the horizon, where a thin green blush was spreading across the foothills. "You hear that?" She tilted her head. "Birds, real ones, not the winter ghosts that only sang in dreams." "It's been so long," she said quietly. "Guess spring don't care how long you hide. It always finds you." That afternoon, Mara rode Dusty across the open meadow. letting the mare stretch her legs after the long winter. The air smelled of thawed soil and sage. She closed her eyes and let the wind tear through her hair, a laugh breaking free before she could stop it. For a moment, she was a girl again, barefoot, fearless, untamed. When she returned, Cole was sitting on the porch steps, carving another one of his small wooden horses. "You look like you outran the wind," he said. "I think I did," she said, breathless and grinning. He handed her the carving. "This one's yours." "Thought it was about time." She took it gently, running her thumb over the smooth curve of its neck. "You made it from that old pine by the creek, didn't you? Figured it had good bones." "It's beautiful," she said, "but you shouldn't give me something so fine." He looked at her with quiet certainty. "You earned it." That night, as the sun slipped behind the hills, they sat by the fire and talked about what came next. Mara had begun to imagine a garden near the creek, a patch for beans and wildflowers, maybe even corn if the soil was kind. Cole spoke of adding a proper roof to the barn, of maybe buying a milk cow from the settlement to the east. "You think we're ready for that?" she asked, smiling. "I think we've been ready longer than we knew," he said. A few days later, a wagon came up the trail, 2 women from the nearest homestead, bringing salt and sugar to trade for leather work. Their names were Clara and June, sisters who had heard about the couple in the North Valley. Mara welcomed them with coffee and laughter, and before long the 3 of them were talking like old friends. When the women left, Mara stood watching the wagon disappear down the trail. "Did you hear what they called this place?" she said. Cole looked up from his work. "Can't say I did. They said folks are starting to call it Brenner Valley." He chuckled. "Well, that's your name too. Now." She smiled softly. "I guess it is." For a moment, she thought of her father's name, the one she'd carried like a chain for half her life. Then she thought of the letter she had burned, of the ashes that had drifted away on the wind. That name no longer belonged to her. This one did. As the weeks passed, the valley bloomed. Wildflowers painted the hills in streaks of purple and gold. The air was thick with the hum of bees. Mara planted her garden, hands deep in the soil, feeling its pulse beneath her palms. She sang as she worked, old songs her mother used to hum by the stove. One afternoon, Cole rode into town for supplies, leaving her alone on the homestead. She spent the day baking bread, mending shirts, and watching the sky turn the color of apricots. When he returned at dusk, his horse lathered and his expression grave. She knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her a folded newspaper. Came through the post at the store. "Look." The headline was small but sharp. "Sheriff Abel Ellison dead at 63. Mara read the words twice before they sank in. "They said he died quiet," Cole said gently. "In his sleep." She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the page. "Quiet," she repeated. He never did anything quiet in his life. He watched her carefully. "You all right?" She set the paper down and looked toward the hills, her face unreadable. "Yes," she said finally. "Just thinking." "About what?" "That maybe forgiveness isn't about the ones who ask for it. Maybe it's for the ones who decide to stop carrying the weight." He nodded, understanding. "Then you've already done that." She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I think I'll still talk to him sometimes, just to be sure." That night, she walked out to the creek alone. The moon was rising, full and bright, turning the water to silver. She knelt by the bank, touched the surface with her fingertips, and whispered a few words into the night. Not prayers, not farewells, just the truth. When she stood, The wind moved softly through the grass, and she felt lighter, as if the world itself had exhaled. The next morning, she woke to the sound of birds singing outside the window. The light was golden, the air cool and clean. Cole was already up, chopping wood near the barn. She dressed quietly, walked outside, and watched him for a while. He turned when he saw her, smiling. "Morning, Mrs. Brenner." She smiled back. "Morning, Mr. Brenner." The words no longer felt like borrowed names. They fit. And as she looked out over their valley, she realized that every ending she'd ever feared had only been the start of something new. The wind carried her laughter across the meadow, light and sure, mingling with the sound of the creek. For the first time in her life, Mara Ellison Brenner didn't feel like a woman who had run from the world. She felt like a woman who had finally found her place in it. By late summer, the Brenner Valley was alive with color. The tall grasses shimmered gold in the afternoon sun, and the scent of wild sage drifted through the warm air. Mara stood by the porch railing, her hands dusted with flour, watching Cole lead a pair of young horses down to the creek. The animals moved with skittish grace, their coats gleaming. She smiled faintly, remembering the first time she had seen him like this, steady, patient, his voice a quiet thread between man and beast. There was something sacred in the way he worked, a kind of prayer that had no words. Inside, bread was baking in the stove, the smell filling the cabin with warmth. The small home had grown since the winter new shelves, a proper table, curtains sewn from fabric Clara had brought from town. There was laughter here now, not the brittle kind born from relief, but the easy laughter of belonging. When Cole came back, sweat glistened on his brow. He leaned against the porch post, tipping his hat back. "Colts are coming along fine," he said. "Everything seems to be," Mara replied, her voice soft. "Even us." He smiled. "You sound surprised." She shook her head, grateful. They sat down together on the porch steps, the evening light painting the sky in shades of copper and rose. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them was full, not empty. After a while, Mara said, "I had another dream last night." Cole turned his head. "The old kind or the new?" "The new," she said, a smile touching her lips. "I was riding across the plains, not running from anything, just riding. My mother was there too, only younger. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me and smiled." Cole's eyes softened. "Sounds like a good dream." It was. She said, "I think maybe that's what forgiveness feels like." Later that week, a letter arrived from the town of Silver Bend. It was from Sheriff Donovan, an old friend from Cole's trail days. The letter was short, but it carried a simple invitation. "Come down to town for the Founders Festival. We could use some good folks like you this year." Cole handed the note to Mara. "Been years since I went to one of those." "Then maybe it's time," she said. "We can bring a few pies, and you can show off those horses." He chuckled. "You just want to see if the sheriff still got all his teeth." She grinned. That too. They left early the next morning, wagon loaded with food and fresh loaves of bread. The trail wound through the hills, sunlight filtering through the cottonwoods. As they descended into town, Mara felt a flicker of unease. It was the first time she'd been among strangers since she fled her old life. But when they arrived, no one looked twice. To everyone there, she was simply Mrs. Brenner, the rancher's wife from the North Valley. The festival was lively, full of laughter and music. Children chased each other through the dust. Women sold quilts and preserves, and the air smelled of roasted corn and wood smoke. Mara wandered among the stalls, feeling something she hadn't in years' safety. Sheriff Donovan found them near the livestock pens, his beard grayer than before, but his grin unchanged. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Didn't think I'd ever see you both down here. Guess we got tired of quiet," Cole said. The sheriff tipped his hat to Mara. "Ma'am, I hear your valley's something to see these days. You've done good up there." Mara smiled, her voice warm. "We just listened to what the land wanted to be." The afternoon passed in easy company. They watched the parade of riders, shared coffee with Clara and June, and bought a small blue ribbon from a child who insisted it was for luck. As evening fell, a small band began to play by the bonfire. Couples took to the open space, their boots scuffing the dirt and rhythm. Cole looked at Mara, his eyes catching the firelight. "Care to dance, Mrs. Brenner?" She hesitated, then laughed softly. "I haven't danced in years. Then it's about time you remembered how." He took her hand, and they stepped into the circle of light. The music was slow, lilting, full of life and memory. Mara followed his lead, her movements awkward at first, then freer, lighter. Laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. Around them, the world blurred into warmth and motion. When the song ended, she rested her head against his chest. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. He held her closer. "You always did. You just had to find the road to it." They stayed until the fire burned low, then drove home under a sky thick with stars. The trail was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the soft creak of the wagon. At the crest of the ridge, the valley opened before them, bathed in silver light. Mara drew a long breath. "Look at it," she said. "It's beautiful." Cole nodded. "It's ours." When they reached the cabin, the moon hung low over the hills. They unpacked the wagon in silence, both weary but content. Before going inside, Mara paused at the porch steps. "Cole, yeah, I think I'm finally ready to stop looking back." He smiled. "Then let's start looking forward." She reached out her hand, and he took it, their fingers interlacing. For a moment, everything else fell away. The years of fear, the pain, the long road that had led them here. There was only the soft night, the land breathing around them, and the quiet promise of tomorrow. Inside, the bread still smelled of home. The walls glowed with lamplight, warm and golden. Mara hung the blue ribbon from the window latch, where it caught the breeze and fluttered gently. As she watched it dance, she realized something simple yet profound. Every step she had taken, every loss, every fear had been leading her here, not to escape her past, but to transform it. She turned to Cole, her eyes bright. "You know," she said softly, "freedom doesn't always come from running away." He tilted his head. "No, sometimes," she said, smiling. "It comes from staying and choosing what kind of life you'll build." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "Then we'll keep building, you and me." Outside, the first light of dawn began to touch the valley, painting it in pale gold. The sound of the creek drifted through the still air, a lullaby, a promise, a beginning, and standing there, hand in hand, Mara Ellison Brenner finally understood the truth she had spent her whole life chasing. Freedom wasn't the absence of chains. It was the courage to live, to love, and to begin again. The story she became the cowboy's wife to escape her father. He became her freedom is not only the journey of a woman running away from the past, but also the journey of all those who have gone through trauma and learned to live again. It reminds us that freedom is not about leaving, but about daring to face and choose to love. Silence also has its own power when the heart is peaceful enough. All storms will pass. At any age, we can still start over, can still find someone who does not want to fix us, but only quietly go through the storms with us. Thank you, our viewers, especially those in their 60s, for accompanying and sharing with us. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread the gentle, kind, and hopeful things in this life.